Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe, addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
One of the interesting reasons for doing this program, from time to time we do a subject we've never done before, and as many of our viewers know, we are in our 36th year, and today is one of those times when we're doing something extremely important but we have never addressed before. I'm also pleased to report this is a 2-week series on the topic, the history and nature of plagues in human cause. In order to cover that very important historical subject, I'm so pleased to welcome to the program one of my wonderful colleagues. I welcome Renee Cooper. Our guest holds a BS in biology from West Texas State University. She also holds an MS in biology from West Texas State University. She taught for 12 years in the Texas school system, and I'm proud to say she's been at North Idaho College teaching in natural sciences for the last 16 years. And may I say to you, Renee, I know really the definition of a master teacher, and you certainly are one of those. You do tremendous what you do with your students. Thank you for taking time to do this, and I know you've got a special course that you have taught now on this subject, and we look forward to pursuing it.
Thanks, Tony. It's really great to be here.
And as always, I'm pleased to have a regular panelist, Erna Reinhardt, who's the Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and Erna Reinhardt will start today's questioning.
Thanks, Tony. And Renee, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today. Our topic today is plagues, and what I would like to start the show out with is tell us how you came about teaching this class that you developed for North Idaho College. The name of the class was Microbial Diseases. It's a class that we have never offered before, but it was something that you were very interested in. So share with us for a few minutes how that class came to be and what the response of your students was when you taught it.
Oh, thanks, Erna. Well, I usually teach from like 90 to 120 students in microbiology, 250 each semester. And often at the end of that, they're ready to go down that road to learn a little bit more about microbes, etc. And being a community college, we had not had a class. And then a year ago, there was an effort to put forward several special topics, types of classes, and I went right to the front of the list and said, I want to teach one. And so I wanted to teach something that got in a little bit more about the diseases angle and not just the foundation of microbiology. And I was lucky enough at the National Convention that I found a book called The Power of Plagues. And the book was very intriguing, so I thought I would just try that, where it kind of ties in the disease aspect, some of the history aspect, some of the human rights types of things. And so I didn't even know if anybody would sign up, but I thought we'd give it a try and do something that was a little bit different slant at NIC. And I think they enjoyed it really well. We're going to offer it again in the spring. And so I guess the numbers will tell the story come this spring 2008.
Excellent. Let's start out by having you give us a few definitions, okay? We're talking about plagues, so tell us what an epidemic is.
So an epidemic would probably be the modern term for what in the olden days that we used to use the word plague. The interesting thing is when I say the word plague, it conjures up a lot of things for individuals. There's a lot of fear factors that happen there, etc. And if you just use the term epidemic, it seems a little more clean. It seems like, okay, you're going to rush in with your white lab coats and we'll get it all cleaned up really quick, whereas the word plague has a different aspect. And basically it means a lot of people in an area that have all come down with the same malady, the same disease. If you went one notch past an epidemic, then you would term it a pandemic, and then that would mean something that has gone around the whole world. So it is kind of interesting that in modern days we have dropped the word plague and we've replaced it with the word epidemic, but those two words have the same meaning.
And then one last follow-up, Renee, what is an endemic?
So an endemic is something that's always in the population. The levels are fairly low, but it doesn't flare up big. So in different areas of the world, there will be things that are endemic. Like in the southwest U.S., the plague is still endemic. It's still found in some of the prairie dogs, etc. So the potential's there, but the outbreak is very low and very contained. And so until you have a large number of people in an area, then you just say it's something that's endemic in the population, not something that's ever totally wiped out. So that possibility is there. So you keep things in control. You quarantine when you need to. You have education programs to keep it at nice low levels. Great.
I am so interested in this topic, in particular how you've approached it with your students, because of how we have in history not dealt well with individuals that were affected by these diseases and who we blame. And I just think the way you're doing this, it gives us historical perspective to say, be careful how we judge some of those epidemics today. But for our viewers, we want to talk about such things as the nature of plagues and predicting those plagues and the consequence of increased sedentary human populations and all that. But let's start with the nature of plagues. And how should we understand that from a historical perspective?
So from the historical perspective with plagues, just depending upon what else is in the area, in the community, you're not going to have plagues until you have large numbers of individuals living in fairly close quarters. So as long as human beings were hunter-gatherers, and you're moving from one location to another location with your little band, your family, whatever that population, very sparse, very spread out, you're not going to have a plague. You're not going to have an epidemic because you don't have enough numbers of people. When people finally came around to settling down, when we got to where we could do agriculture, that we could grow crops in one place instead of gathering, when we had animals that we could domesticate, that weren't so skittish that, they'd actually stay in your cage, in the pen. And so we started domesticating animals. So now we're living in closer contact with not just individuals, but also into closer contact with the animals. And so now we're sharing the microbes back and forth. And so you've got to get to that particular setup before you can even have a plague. Otherwise, you don't have enough numbers of individuals to support it. So, if you had 12 people in the band and the disease killed off 11, then you're done at that particular point. You don't. It's a numbers game. You don't have enough numbers.
And so, as populations exploded on this planet,
yes.
The population of China and India and all, and any area where the population is very, very high, I guess there's 2 points about the nature of plague. One is that if it does hit, the level of I guess we could say consequences of disaster would be much greater because you're so concentrated and so many more people would be affected.
Absolutely. So when you have that many people living in close contact, and if it's something that's new, if it's something that the medical community has not been on the lookout for, or if there's been a genetic change and no individual has any natural immunity, then it could be very devastating to just to look out into your city and see maybe that half the population has succumbed to that particular plague. And so then when you have that, then you've got fear.
Right.
Because it's something you're not accustomed to seeing.
And then you try to find out the cause, maybe very emotional rather than scientific, and blame certain members of society. We are now a global village, so in relation to what you're saying now, that if something starts in a particular locality where there's a large population, but people get on airplanes and people are crisscrossing the entire planet every day, so the chances of something, if it's very serious and we don't have an antidote to it now, it could affect the entire population of Earth in the sense it would spread everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. When we had the SARS outbreak, it took less than 4 months to cover the entire globe. And so between traveling for your work, traveling for your pleasure, just traveling maybe from the suburb to the inner city to do your workings, we're so interconnected. There's so many people and we're so interconnected. So every time you get on that airplane, it's not just you getting on the airplane, but all of your microbes are also getting on the airplane with you.
And that's why we had recently had such a reaction to the young man who had a form of tuberculosis and thought it was, I guess, much more contagious than it was, and he went to Europe, and it just made the news all over the world.
And because the potential is there. The potential is there. And maybe we overreacted, maybe we didn't, but I'd much rather we reacted appropriately than to not react at all, because that connection in the numbers is just so grand.
Erna Reinhardt.
Renee, give us a little history lesson and a little science lesson, and share with us some of the effects and how one of the very first plagues happened and the effects that it had on the people and why it happened, and both the historical aspect and a little bit about the science of it.
So probably the plague there that comes to most people's mind would be what some people refer to as the Black Death or the bubonic plague. And that one's actually caused by a microbe, Yersinia pestis, which is carried on a flea, which is carried on the rat. And so, of course, then the fleas can move from rats to humans. So in this particular situation, if you've got enough agriculture, enough grain where you're feeding the humans concentrated in the population, then you're also going to have enough left over to have the rat population explode. And of course, they're going to want a warm place, just like you're wanting a warm place. And if your bed's made out of straw, if the roof is made out of straw, etc., like in the 14th century, then you're going to be living in those close communities. And of course, I mean, nowadays we think of our home being very tight and we can keep all those critters out, more or less. And if anybody did have one of the big black rats in their house, by all means, you know, if we just have a little spider, we take care of it right away from that angle. So here you have a microbe that's being carried on the flea, which is on the rats, and then the rats moving from, you know, around in the population. And so at first the rats would die. And then when the rat dies, then the flea's going to change homes because the flea's going to want a warm body. And so then it's going to move into the human population. But in that case scenario, those individuals were very used to seeing rats. You know, so it wasn't an odd thing. I mean, they'd go out to the woodshed and get the wood and come back in, and they were very used to it, you know, whereas today we would scream and holler and jump on the table and call 911 if there were rats in the house. And so they were very used to mingling with the animal population more than we are today. However, at that time in 14th century Europe, we did not know that there were microbes there that could cause those diseases. And then you have people that are succumbing very quickly to the diseases, and some of the best numbers say anywhere from a third to two-thirds of Europe was wiped out. So I kind of take the middle ground and say about half of Europe being wiped out in that situation. So now you're going to be very fearful.
Right. That's amazing.
It's incredible.
That many people die.
Right. And it's not just the poor that are dying. It's not just those lacking in nutrition that are dying. You know, even the noblemen that are supposed to be doing the protecting. You know, and so now everybody's very fearful. The church isn't protecting them. The nobles aren't protecting them. Everybody's being hit, whether they're good people or bad people. They're all succumbing to the disease. And so now you have this fear that runs through the human population. And then a lot of people flee. You know, they flee the city. They maybe go back to where they were raised or to a countryside that emotionally gave them comfort. And then when they do that, they take the disease with them. And so now you're spreading, you know, maybe it's still on foot, maybe it's a horse and carriage. Not like today could be if you could, you know, jump on an airplane and go to another part of the country, but you're still carrying the seeds and still taking those with you. And this goes on for year after year after year. And it's just this incredible fear that is going to run through the people. And you're going to want to protect your family. You want to know why. You want somebody to blame, you know. And so that just gets incredibly scary that when we're very fearful, we don't always act as we should act in those situations.
In that example, how did it end? And did those people at that point in time, did the results become known to those people, or was that not discovered what caused that until way later?
It was at the very, very end of all of that, before Pasteur and some of the other great scientists. So we're moving forward, you know, almost 100 years before we put all those pieces together. And basically what happens then is as the disease moves through the population, it needs the numbers. Well, now you've got half the numbers because half the population has died off. People have become fearful and have almost self-isolated. And so you start the self-isolating, so now you're not carrying the disease forward as much, and the plague is killing off the rats, so that decreases the numbers. And so in some ways, if the disease killed off everyone, that would be a little silly for the disease, because then the disease doesn't have a host. And so the disease is going to die back into some more natural numbers before it kills off, the entire population. Because that host microbe, man microbe, we still have a relationship associated in those situations.
So was there a human rights angle in that example?
In the bubonic plague and the Black Death, there were some absolutely some horrible things that happened at that time. Unfortunately, one group of people that were blamed were Jews. Some of the different, you have to remember it's a time where there's a lot of a caste system, and people are in this order, in this ranking. And at that particular time, the Jews weren't at the top of the caste system; they were towards the bottom of that type of system, and they very much enjoyed their company and would live in their communities. And so, maybe because people didn't know them as well, maybe because people didn't understand their religion as well, maybe because the Roman Catholic Church was so powerful at the time. But unfortunately, in many of those cases, the Jews were blamed. Even if the city council people would try to protect them, you ended up with this mob mentality that grows out of this fear situation. And there's just time and time and time again documented where they had round up hundreds, up to 900 of these individuals, and put them in a wooden building and light the wooden building on fire. Stories of people being burned alive unless they would, confess to poisoning a well or wherever they thought the seeds came from, because they didn't understand the bacteria. And just a horrible situation of not having the scientific knowledge to do the right thing. But even if you didn't have the scientific knowledge to go to that level, to be ugly to a group of individuals that you didn't understand. Very, very hard. That was probably one of the most powerful pieces of this class, is because as the students were going through this, they came in thinking they were just going to learn all the science type of situation, and we talked about these other issues, and they really struggled with the whys, and they struggled with the how could we have done this, and in trying to explore and come up with some justification when there wasn't a justification, other than people were very fearful. And when you're in a fear situation with a lack of knowledge, you have to really work really hard not to cross over to the dark side of human nature.
I can just not commend you enough or praise you enough for how you were able to go into depth with your students. One, dealing as a biologist, what you should, and the explanation. And that's why I titled this program "The Human Cost." Also, just to follow up on this a little bit more, what Erna did, they lived with the rats all this time, and even though rats were dying, they just didn't identify that or with the fleas. I suppose in their mind, again, with this horrible idea they had of blaming the Jewish people, they would blame the Jewish people for both their death and the rats dying too, rather than dealing with any scientific processes. I want to take this a little further and get your reaction to it. I think you've done something from the viewpoint of a scientist that's really important in the field of human rights, and I intend to share that with some of my colleagues around the country. And that is, we've had in more recent times a debate between how much should we rely upon science and how much are we going to rely upon our own ideas or philosophies. And isn't this, and I'd like to get your reaction, isn't this a good example where that we should not get into a mode of where we're saying we're going to forsake science because in this field, because certainly it's there that we not only learn what caused it, but then how to deal with it and help the human race survive.
Oh, I mean, at this particular point in history, we have a lot of science that we can stand on that's been going on for a long period of time. And so you do have to look at it. And as a scientist, you still always have to question it.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at what's there, you question what's there. You have to always say, is this making sense? Is this collaborated in another place or piece of the literature? You just can't walk away from it. I like to think that the best scientists are those that think really hard with their brain and then let the information settle in their heart and then come back to their brain to make that decision.
Make that connection.
And make that connection.
You know, one of the great characteristics of scientists, and I know you agree, and we have a debate sometimes that some people say we shouldn't call political science a science, we should call it just government, but there's some political science and behaviors that I've joined in with the natural scientists, is that actually when you have a thesis or hypothesis, great scientists don't say this is the absolute truth. You have to have something to test. So you have the hypothesis, and you can do everything you can to disprove it, and if you can't, you're moving more towards the answer.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, and that line of reasoning goes with you can use that line of reasoning in buying a car. Is this the right car for me?
Right.
And you go through all and then try to talk yourself out of it. The same thing with the scientific principle. You lay that out there as your hypothesis, and then you see if you can make it fall apart. Because if it won't stand the test, then you know to move in a little different direction to get a little closer to the truth.
And we have so much more we're going to deal with on the second show. We have about 7 minutes left, but we'll say some of this for the second show, and I know our viewers will come back in. This is so fascinating. But on another subtopic here, you do a lot about predicting plagues, or what we call epidemics today. Well, because of the advancements of science, and also with the incredible medical advances, aren't we better at predicting? We're not perfect, you know, like the SARS, or we talked about some of those recent ones. We didn't expect it, but are we better at predicting, and what are some of the things we should do to try to predict so that we can prevent that level of disaster? Think about today, if half of the world's population was to die from some.
Oh wow, that would be scary even for me. I did tease through this class and say that predicting